My name is Lauren Patterson, and at 32 years old, I never expected my own family to accuse me of theft. Growing up, we were always close despite the occasional disagreements. That changed the day my father pointed his finger at me and demanded I return $50,000 he claimed I stole from my sick mother. What they did not know was that I had been gathering evidence for weeks. I had proof that would shatter our family forever. If you are watching this story, please let me know where you are viewing from. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I cleared my name. I grew up in Mapleton, a quiet suburban town where everyone seemed to know each other. Our house was nothing fancy, a modest 3-bedroom home with a small yard where we hosted barbecues in the summer and built snowmen in the winter. We were solidly middle class, with my parents working hard to provide for me and my sister. My mother, Patricia, dedicated 30 years of her life to nursing at Mapleton General Hospital. Everyone in town knew and respected her. She was the kind of nurse who remembered her patients years later, who brought homemade cookies to the elderly ones, and who stayed late to hold the hands of those who had no visitors. At home, she was just as nurturing, always ready with a bandage for a scraped knee or a warm hug after a rough day at school. We shared a special bond that only grew stronger as I entered adulthood. She was not just my mother, but my confidant and friend. My father, Robert, was a different story altogether. After serving 15 years in the military, he transitioned to civilian life as an accountant for a local firm. He brought his military precision to everything he did, from the perfectly aligned shoes in his closet to the meticulously kept financial records. Conversation with him often felt like a briefing, direct and to the point. He loved us, I never doubted that, but his love came wrapped in discipline and high expectations. Then there was my sister Jessica, 2 years older than me and always seemingly 2 steps ahead. While I struggled with math, she won the state mathematics competition. When I made the softball team, she became team captain. She graduated college with honors while I changed majors twice before finding my path. Our parents never explicitly compared us, but they did not have to. Jessica made sure I knew exactly where I stood in her shadow. Life continued this way until 6 months ago, when my mother received a diagnosis that rocked our family to its core: chronic myeloid leukemia, a type of blood cancer. Her prognosis was hopeful with proper treatment, but the medical bills started piling up almost immediately. The insurance covered most of it, but the out-of-pocket expenses for specialized treatments and medications quickly became overwhelming. By this time, I had built a successful career as a financial advisor at Westbrook Financial Partners. I specialized in retirement planning and investment strategies, helping clients secure their financial futures. The irony is not lost on me that I could help strangers plan for decades ahead, but could not foresee the financial storm brewing in my own family. For years, I had been helping my mother manage her finances informally. She trusted my expertise, and I was happy to help her organize her retirement savings, investment portfolio, and regular banking. My father, despite his background in accounting, preferred to keep his finances completely separate. Marriage works better when money has clear boundaries, he would say. My mother never questioned this arrangement. As the medical bills increased, so did the tension in our family gatherings. Sunday dinners, once filled with laughter and comfortable silences, became strained affairs. Jessica, who had married Thomas Blackwell 3 years prior, became increasingly hostile whenever the topic of money arose. "Mom and Dad should not have to worry about money at a time like this," she would say, glaring pointedly in my direction, as if I was somehow responsible for our mother's illness or the accompanying expenses. Thomas would nod along, his hand on Jessica's, a united front. They had a beautiful house in the expensive part of town, drove matching luxury cars, and took lavish vacations twice a year. Thomas worked in investments, though he never specified exactly what he invested in or for whom. Jessica had quit her job as a marketing executive shortly after they married. Meanwhile, my mother's condition began to deteriorate, not from the cancer itself, but from the side effects of the treatment. Her once sharp mind became foggy at times. She would forget conversations we had just had or misplace important items. Her friend Eleanor Jenkins, a retired nurse who had worked alongside my mother for 20 years, started coming by daily to help with medications and light housekeeping. "Your mother is strong," Eleanor assured me one afternoon as we sat at the kitchen table while my mother napped. "But this is a lot for anyone to handle. The medications can affect cognitive function temporarily." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. But that same afternoon, as I was helping organize some paperwork on my mother's desk, I noticed something concerning. The bank statements for her primary checking account showed several large withdrawals that I did not recognize. Nothing that immediately triggered alarm bells, but enough to make me take a closer look at her finances. What I found would eventually tear our family apart. The first unusual withdrawal I noticed was for $3,000, dated just 2 weeks after my mother's diagnosis. When I asked her about it casually, she looked confused. "I do not remember taking that much out," she said, her forehead creasing with concentration. Could it have been for the specialist copayment Dr. Winters was not in network? The specialist had been expensive, but nowhere near $3,000. I made a note to check into it further, but did not push her. She had enough to worry about. A week later, I noticed another withdrawal, this time for $5,000. Again, my mother had no recollection of making such a large withdrawal. I began to wonder if her memory lapses were more serious than we thought, or if something else was happening. When I mentioned these discrepancies to Jessica and Thomas during our next family dinner, they exchanged a look I could not quite interpret. "Mom has a lot on her mind right now," Jessica said dismissively. "She probably just forgot. Stop making everything into a big deal, Lauren." Thomas nodded in agreement. "Financial stress is the last thing your parents need right now. Maybe you should focus more on supporting them emotionally instead of scrutinizing their bank statements." Their reaction struck me as odd. Why would they be so quick to dismiss a potential issue with thousands of dollars? I decided to bring it up with my father instead. "Dad, have you noticed any unusual withdrawals from Mom's accounts recently?" I asked him the following weekend. He barely looked up from his newspaper. "Your mother handles her own banking. Always has." "Yes, but with her memory issues lately." "Are you suggesting your mother cannot manage her own money?" There was an edge to his voice that made me back down immediately. "No, of course not. I just thought, never mind." That evening, I found a moment alone with my mother in the garden. She was sitting on her favorite bench wrapped in a cardigan, despite the warm evening air, a side effect of her treatment, making her perpetually cold. "Mom, I need to ask you something important about your finances," I said, gently sitting beside her. She looked up at me, her eyes clear for the moment. "What is it, sweetheart?" "There have been some large withdrawals from your checking account recently. I am concerned because you do not seem to remember making them." She frowned, genuinely troubled. "I have not been to the bank in weeks, except to deposit the check from my pension. Would you be comfortable if I monitored your accounts more closely, just until you are feeling better?" My mother reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "I already added you as an authorized user years ago. Remember, I trust you completely, Lauren, more than anyone." The conviction in her voice strengthened my resolve to get to the bottom of this mystery. The next day, I logged into her online banking portal to review recent transactions more thoroughly. That is when I discovered a single withdrawal of $50,000 from her retirement savings account processed just 3 days earlier. This was not just concerning, it was alarming. This represented nearly a quarter of her entire retirement fund. I immediately printed the transaction receipt and started making notes. The withdrawal had been made in person at the main branch downtown. It required ID verification and a signature. According to the timestamp, it happened at 2:15 in the afternoon, when I had been in a client meeting across town. My mother had been at a chemotherapy appointment with Eleanor. I began a methodical investigation, keeping detailed notes in a small notebook I carried everywhere. I noted dates, times, amounts, and any potential witnesses to our whereabouts during the transactions in question. My next step was to consult with her oncologist, Dr. Winters, about her cognitive state. I explained my concerns without directly accusing anyone of financial exploitation. Your mother does experience some memory lapses and confusion, Dr. Winters confirmed. It is a common side effect of her treatment regimen. However, she has not shown signs of severe cognitive impairment that would render her incapable of making financial decisions. That said, it is not uncommon for patients in her situation to be vulnerable to influence or manipulation. His careful choice of words confirmed my growing suspicions. Someone was taking advantage of my mother's condition. Someone who had access to her accounts, knew her routines, and could potentially forge her signature. The list of suspects was painfully short. I decided to confront Jessica directly. I invited her to lunch at a quiet cafe downtown away from our parents and Thomas. "I need to talk to you about Mom's finances," I said once we had ordered. "There have been some concerning withdrawals from her accounts." Jessica stirred her iced tea slowly, not meeting my eyes. "As I said before, Mom has a lot on her mind. She is probably just forgetting, including a $50,000 withdrawal 3 days ago, while she was at chemotherapy." Jessica's spoon clinked against the glass as she set it down too forcefully. "Are you accusing someone of stealing from Mom? That is a pretty serious allegation, Lauren." "I am not accusing anyone. I am just trying to figure out what happened to the money." "Maybe you should look in the mirror," she snapped, her voice rising. "You are the one with access to her accounts. You are the one who is always talking about investments and financial planning. How convenient that now there is money missing." The other diners turned to look at us. Jessica stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. "I cannot believe you would try to deflect your own guilt by suggesting someone else in the family is stealing. That is low even for you." With that, she stormed out, leaving me sitting alone with 2 untouched salads and a growing sense of dread. That evening, I called the bank and scheduled an appointment with the branch manager for the following morning. It was time to get official documentation and find out exactly who had made that $50,000 withdrawal. Sunday arrived, and with it, our regular family dinner at my parents' house. After the confrontation with Jessica, I was apprehensive about going, but skipping it would only make me look guilty. Besides, I was hoping to discreetly talk to my mother about adding extra security measures to her accounts. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I sensed something was off. Both Jessica's sleek black SUV and Thomas's sports car were already parked outside, unusual, since they typically arrived fashionably late. The curtains in the living room window twitched as I got out of my car, as if someone had been watching for me. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in. The house was unnaturally quiet. No sounds of my mother bustling in the kitchen or my father's baseball game on the television. Instead, I found everyone seated in the living room as if waiting for me. My father sat in his recliner, back straight, hands gripping the armrests. My mother perched on the edge of the sofa, eyes downcast, looking frail in her oversized sweater. Jessica and Thomas occupied the love seat, her arm linked through his, a united front. "Lauren," my father acknowledged me coolly. No hug, no smile, none of the warmth that usually accompanied my visits. "Hi everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the tension crackling in the air. "Is everything okay?" No one answered immediately. I set my purse down and took the only empty seat, an uncomfortable wooden chair that had been pulled in from the dining room, directly across from my father. It felt like an interrogation setup. "Should we eat?" I asked, glancing toward the kitchen. There were no cooking smells, no place settings visible on the dining table beyond the archway. "We are not hungry," my father said flatly. My mother flinched slightly at his words, but remained silent. Then my father leaned forward, his face flushing with anger. "We know what you did, Lauren." "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused, though my heart had begun to race. "That," is when it happened. My father stood up, pointed his finger directly at me, and shouted words I never thought I would hear from him. Return the $50,000 or do not come back to this house. The force of his words physically pushed me back in my chair. Before I could respond, Jessica jumped in her voice, dripping with righteous indignation. You took Mom's money. We all know it. I looked to my mother, hoping for support, for any indication that she did not believe these accusations. But she would not meet my eyes. She stared down at her hands, which were twisting a tissue into shreds in her lap. I did not take any money, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. I have been trying to figure out who made those withdrawals. That is why I was asking questions. Stop lying, Jessica hissed. You have been managing her accounts for years. You are the only one with access besides Mom, and she was at chemotherapy when the money was taken. That proves it was not me, I argued. I was with a client at that time. I have calendar records, witnesses. Enough excuses, my father interrupted. He walked to the coffee table and picked up a manila folder which he thrust toward me. Explain this. Inside were printouts of bank statements and a withdrawal slip, with what appeared to be my signature authorizing the $50,000 transfer. I stared at it in shock. The signature looked like mine at first glance, but examining it more closely, I could see subtle differences in the way the L was formed and the slant of the letters. This is not my signature, I said, looking up at them. This is forged. Thomas scoffed. That is convenient. I am serious. Compare it to my actual signature. There are differences. I reached for my purse to pull out my driver's license, but Jessica snatched the folder back. The bank verified it was your signature, she said smugly. And you were an authorized user on the account. The evidence is clear. Jessica, I would never steal from Mom. You know me. I thought I did, she cut in. But people change. Maybe your financial advisor's salary is not covering your expenses. Maybe you have gambling debts or are underwater on your mortgage. Who knows? The irony of her accusation might have made me laugh if the situation were not so serious. I lived within my means in a modest apartment, drove a 6-year-old car, and had an emergency fund that would cover 6 months of expenses if needed. I had no debts besides my student loans, which were nearly paid off. This is insane, I said, looking from face to face, searching for any sign of doubt or willingness to hear me out. I did not take the money. I have been trying to protect Mom's finances, not exploit them. My father crossed his arms over his chest. Then where is the money, Lauren? It did not just vanish into thin air. I do not know, but I intend to find out. If you would just give me a chance to... We have given you too many chances already, my father cut in. You have been alone with your mother, handling her finances, having private conversations. We trusted you. And I have never betrayed that trust. Please, Mom, I turned to her directly. You know I would never do this to you. Finally, my mother looked up. There were tears in her eyes, and for a moment I thought she might defend me. But then Jessica moved to sit beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. Mom is devastated by your betrayal, Jessica said. How could you take advantage of her illness like this? I did not. I insisted, my own eyes filling with tears now. Someone is setting me up. Someone who knows about Mom's accounts and my access to them. Enough, my father thundered. This is what is going to happen. You will return the $50,000 by the end of the week, or we will go to the police. Until then, you are not welcome in this house. Dad, please. Get out, he said, his voice suddenly quiet but no less forceful. Now. I looked around the room one last time at the family who had just chosen to believe the worst of me without a fair hearing. My mother was openly crying now. Jessica was comforting her with a self-righteous expression. Thomas was examining his nails as if bored by the whole scene, and my father stood rigid, pointing toward the door. I picked up my purse with shaking hands and walked out each step, feeling like I was moving through quicksand. As I closed the front door behind me, I heard my mother's sob, followed by Jessica's voice. "It is okay, Mom. We will fix this." But I was the one who would fix it. I would find the truth, clear my name, and expose whoever was really behind the missing money, even if it meant tearing our family apart in the process. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur. I barely remembered navigating the familiar streets, my mind replaying the accusation scene over and over. By the time I unlocked my door and stepped inside, my shock had transformed into a cold, focused anger. I dropped my purse on the counter and immediately called my best friend, Samantha. "They think I stole $50,000 from my own mother," I said when she answered, not bothering with a greeting. "What, Lauren? Slow down. Who thinks that?" I paced my small living room as I recounted the entire confrontation, from the ambush setup to being thrown out of my childhood home. "That is insane," Samantha said when I finished. "They really believe you would steal from your sick mother after everything you have done to help her." "Apparently so." My voice cracked slightly. The emotional weight of the situation was starting to catch up with me. "So, what are you going to do? Pay them to make it go away?" I stopped pacing. "Absolutely not. I did not take that money, and I am going to prove it." "That is my girl," Samantha said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "How can I help?" "Just believing me is enough for now," I replied, grateful for her immediate support. "I need to think like a financial investigator, not a hurt daughter." After hanging up, I cleared my dining table and set up what I thought of as a war room. I pulled out my laptop, notepads, pens, and the small notebook where I had been tracking the unusual account activities. If someone was framing me, they had made a critical error in choosing a victim who specialized in following money trails. My professional background became my greatest asset. As a financial advisor, I was trained to notice patterns, track transactions, and document everything meticulously. I started by making a timeline of all the withdrawals, noting exact times and amounts. The $50,000 withdrawal had occurred at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon last Tuesday. I pulled up my work calendar and confirmed what I already knew. I had been in a client meeting from 1:30 to 3 that day with the Johnsons discussing their retirement portfolio. My assistant Brenda and the clients themselves could verify my whereabouts. Next, I called the bank and spoke to a different representative than the one who had helped me schedule my appointment for Monday morning. Without revealing the family drama, I asked about their security protocols for large withdrawals. For a withdrawal of that size, we require photo identification and verification of the signature on file, the representative explained. If it is an authorized user making the withdrawal, we need additional documentation showing their authority on the account. "What about security cameras? Does the bank record transactions at the teller windows?" "Yes. All areas of the bank are under video surveillance for security purposes. Those recordings are maintained for 90 days. That was the breakthrough I needed. If someone had impersonated me to make the withdrawal, there would be video evidence. I spent the next day gathering every piece of documentation I could think of. I printed my calendar emails confirming the client meeting and even the parking garage receipt, showing when I had arrived and left the office building that day. I pulled out old bank statements, showing my mother had added me as an authorized user 5 years ago, well before her illness. I also collected samples of my authentic signature from various official documents. Monday morning, I arrived at the bank as soon as it opened. The branch manager, Harold Williams, was a gray-haired man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I had called ahead to explain I needed to discuss a potentially fraudulent transaction, so he was expecting me. "Miss Patterson, please come in," he said, showing me to his office and closing the door. "How can I help you today?" I laid out the situation as clearly and unemotionally as I could, presenting the documentation I had gathered. "I believe someone forged my signature to withdraw $50,000 from my mother's account. I need to verify who actually made this transaction." Harold examined the withdrawal slip with a frown. "This does appear to be your signature based on what we have on file. It is a good forgery, but it is not mine." I insisted. Compare it to these. I slid across the table several documents with my authentic signature. He studied them closely, then nodded slowly. There are some discrepancies now that you point them out. The pressure points and angle are different. More importantly, I can prove I was nowhere near this bank when the transaction occurred. I need to see the security footage from that day. Harold hesitated. That would require a formal investigation or a subpoena, Miss Patterson. We cannot simply allow customers to view security footage. My family is accusing me of stealing from my sick mother, I said, leaning forward. They are threatening to go to the police. If that happens, a subpoena will follow anyway. Wouldn't it be better to clear this up now before it escalates further? Whether it was the determined look in my eyes or the logic of my argument, Harold relented. Let me make a few calls. This is an unusual situation. An hour later, after consultations with the bank's security department and legal team, I was escorted to a small conference room where a security officer had set up a computer. The footage had been queued to the correct time and date. We can show you only the specific transaction you are inquiring about, the security officer explained, and you cannot record or take photos of the screen. I understand, I said, my heart pounding as he pressed play. The black and white footage showed a teller window from an angle above and behind the customer. A woman stepped up to the counter, her back to the camera. She wore a light-colored blazer and had her hair pulled back in a low ponytail, similar to how I often wore mine at work. She slid some papers across to the teller and presented what appeared to be an ID. Can you zoom in? I asked. The security officer adjusted the view, and as the woman turned slightly to reach for a pen, her profile became visible for just a moment. My breath caught in my throat. Even in the grainy footage, there was no mistaking that profile. It was Jessica. My own sister had stolen $50,000 from our mother's account and framed me for it. The security officer must have noticed my reaction. Do you recognize this person? I nodded, unable to speak for a moment, as waves of betrayal and anger washed over me. It is my sister, I finally managed to say. She is trying to frame me. Harold, who had been observing silently, cleared his throat. Miss Patterson, this is a serious allegation. Are you certain? Absolutely certain, I replied, my voice stronger now. And I want a copy of the transaction records showing this withdrawal with a note that I have disputed it and provided evidence that I was not the person who made it. The process of filing a formal dispute took another hour. By the time I left the bank, I had official documentation showing that the signature on the withdrawal slip was questionable and that I had reported the transaction as fraudulent. Most importantly, I had confirmation from 3 bank employees who had viewed the security footage that the person making the withdrawal was not me. But I knew bank documentation alone might not be enough to convince my family, especially if Jessica continued to deny her actions. I needed more evidence. Over the next 2 days, I built my case methodically. I obtained a notarized statement from my clients confirming our meeting time. I requested and received cell phone records showing my location data placed me across town during the bank transaction. I even went to the parking garage where I had parked that day and obtained a copy of their security footage showing my car in their structure during the critical time period. Through it all, I battled my own emotional turmoil. Why would Jessica do this? What had driven her to steal from our sick mother and then frame me for it? The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. We had our differences growing up, but this was beyond sibling rivalry. This was calculated, malicious, and potentially criminal. On Wednesday evening, my boyfriend Michael came over after work. He found me surrounded by papers at my dining table, red-eyed from lack of sleep and stress. "Lauren, you look exhausted," he said, setting down the takeout he had brought. "Have you been at this all day?" I nodded, rubbing my eyes. "I cannot stop until I clear my name." He looked over the evidence I had compiled. "This is impressive. You have solid proof it was Jessica, not you. But what if they still do not believe me? What if they choose her side again? The fear that had been lurking beneath my determination surfaced suddenly. Maybe I should just pay the money to keep the peace. I have some savings. It would wipe me out, but… No, Michael said, firmly taking my hands in his. You did not do this. You should not have to pay for something you did not do. And you definitely should not have to pay for being framed by your own sister. But my family needs to know the truth, he finished for me. Even if it hurts them, even if it changes things forever, you cannot protect them from reality, Lauren. I knew he was right. This was not just about clearing my name anymore. It was about exposing a painful truth that my family needed to face, especially my mother. I will confront them tomorrow, I decided. All of them together. Do you want me to come with you? Michael offered. I shook my head. This is something I need to do alone. But thank you for believing in me from the start. That night, I organized all my evidence into a clear, chronological presentation. I made copies of everything and placed the originals in a secure folder. I rehearsed what I would say, trying to prepare for every possible reaction. By morning, I felt ready. Not just to clear my name, but to stand up for myself in a way I never had before with my family. Jessica had underestimated me, assuming I would either pay the money or crumble under the accusation. She was about to discover just how wrong she had been. The following evening, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. I had considered calling ahead but decided against it, fearing they might refuse to see me or that Jessica would find a way to interfere. The element of surprise would work in my favor. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed both my parents' cars were there along with Jessica's SUV. Perfect. Everyone I needed to confront was already gathered. I took a deep breath, picked up my folder of evidence, and walked to the front door with determined steps. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key, an acknowledgement that I had been told not to return. My father answered, his expression hardening when he saw me. "Lauren, I told you not to come back unless you brought the money," he said, blocking the doorway. "I brought something better than money," I replied, my voice steady. "The truth." Before he could respond, my mother appeared behind him. "Who is it, Robert?" When she saw me, her face registered surprise, then uncertainty. "Lauren." "Let me in, Dad," I said firmly. "I have something all of you need to see." Perhaps it was the confidence in my voice or the folder clutched in my hands, but after a moment's hesitation, he stepped aside. I walked into the living room to find Jessica and Thomas sitting exactly where they had been during the accusation, as if no time had passed. Jessica jumped to her feet when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" "Did she bring the money?" "No, she claims to have the truth," my father said, following me into the room. "May I sit?" I asked, gesturing to the same uncomfortable chair I had occupied during the accusation. My father nodded curtly. I sat down and placed my folder on the coffee table in front of me, but did not open it yet. I needed to establish control of the conversation first. "4 days ago, you accused me of stealing $50,000 from Mom's account." I began looking at each of them in turn. "You refused to hear my side of the story. You threw me out of this house and threatened to go to the police. And the deadline for returning the money is tomorrow," my father interjected. "So, unless you brought it with you—" "I did not take the money," I stated clearly. "I never did. And I have proof." Jessica scoffed. "What kind of proof could you possibly have?" "The bank confirmed it was your signature." "Did they?" I asked, opening my folder and removing the first document. Because when I spoke to them, they noted significant discrepancies between the signature on the withdrawal slip and my actual signature. Here is their official statement. I placed the bank's document on the coffee table. My father picked it up, adjusting his reading glasses as he examined it. "This just says the signature is disputed," he said dismissively. "It proves nothing." "You are right," I agreed. "By itself it does not prove much. But this does." I removed the next set of documents, my client meeting confirmation, the notarized statement from the clients verifying my presence, and my calendar printout. I was in a client meeting from 1:30 to 3 on the day the money was withdrawn. The transaction occurred at 2:15. I physically could not have been at the bank. Thomas leaned forward slightly, his interest seemingly piqued despite himself. You could have had an accomplice. An accomplice who looks exactly like me on security footage, I countered, because that is what would have been needed. Jessica shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. What security footage? From the bank, I said, watching her reaction carefully. All banks have cameras at the teller windows. I asked to view the footage from the day of the withdrawal. They would not show you that, Jessica said quickly. Banks have privacy policies. They made an exception given the circumstances, I replied. 3 bank employees can confirm that the person in that footage was not me. My mother, who had been silent until now, spoke up. If it was not you, Lauren, then who was it? This was the moment I had been preparing for. The point of no return. I reached into my folder and slowly, deliberately withdrew the teller transaction slips from the bank showing the timestamp and the question's signature. I placed them on the counter, sliding them toward the center of the coffee table where everyone could see. It was Jessica, I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents both turned to look at my sister, whose face had drained of all color. Thomas stared at his wife with an expression I could not quite read: surprise, confusion, or perhaps the dawning of understanding. That is ridiculous, Jessica finally sputtered. How dare you accuse me? This is just another one of your desperate attempts to shift blame. The bank's security footage clearly shows you at the teller window, Jessica, I continued calmly. You wore a blazer similar to ones I owned, styled your hair like mine, and somehow obtained a fake ID with my information. You forged my signature, not perfectly, but well enough to fool a busy teller. This is absurd, she insisted, but her voice had lost its conviction. Is it? I asked, pulling out my cell phone records. These show I was across town at my office building when the withdrawal happened. The parking garage footage confirms my car was there the entire time, and 3 bank employees are willing to testify that the woman in the security footage was you, not me. My father had gone very still, his face unreadable. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. Why would Jessica do such a thing? My mother whispered. That is what I would like to know, I said, turning my gaze directly to my sister. Why, Jessica? Why would you steal from Mom while she is fighting cancer? And why would you try to frame me for it? Jessica's composure finally cracked, her face contorted with a mix of anger and desperation. You have always been her favorite, she burst out. Perfect Lauren, who could do no wrong. The financial genius who gets to manage all Mom's money while I get lectured about being responsible. This is not about favoritism, I countered. This is about $50,000 that Mom needs for her treatment. We needed that money, Jessica cried. Thomas put a hand on her arm, but she shook it off violently. Tell them, Thomas. Tell them about the debt. Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably clearly, not wanting to be dragged into this. Jessica, maybe we should discuss this privately. No more secrets, my father commanded, his voice like steel. What debt? Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. My investment firm has been struggling. We made some high-risk plays that did not pan out. We are underwater on the mortgage, behind on the car payments. So you stole from my sick mother? I asked incredulously. Instead of asking for help or selling your luxury cars? It was supposed to be a loan, Jessica insisted, tears streaming down her face now. I was going to pay it back as soon as Thomas's investments recovered. A loan without asking, my mother said, finding her voice. Jessica, how could you? And framing Lauren, my father added, his face darkening with anger, letting us believe she had betrayed her own mother. Jessica's excuses came tumbling out in a desperate stream. She would have been fine. She has savings, a good job. She could have managed without the money until we paid it back. I knew you would never let me access the accounts if I asked directly. And then when Lauren started asking questions, I had to do something. I could not let her find out. The more she spoke, the more her justifications unraveled, revealing the selfishness at their core. Thomas sat beside her, looking increasingly uncomfortable, as if he was seeing his wife clearly for the first time. "Did you know about this?" my father asked him directly. Thomas hesitated. "I knew we had borrowed money from Jessica's family," he admitted. "I did not know the details of how she obtained it or that Lauren was being blamed. Whether that was true or he was simply saving himself, I could not tell. But my mother's soft crying drew all our attention. She looked utterly devastated, not just by Jessica's theft, but by the betrayal of trust. "I want the money back," my mother said, quietly, but firmly. "All of it." "Mom, we do not have it anymore," Jessica admitted. "We used it to catch up on the mortgage and credit cards. We cannot just give it back right away." "Then, you will sell whatever you need to sell," my father stated, his tone, leaving no room for argument. "The cars, jewelry, whatever it takes. Your mother needs that money for her treatment." The family dynamic had shifted completely. My parents, who days ago had been unified in their condemnation of me, now sat side by side in stunned disbelief at Jessica's actions. Thomas had inched away from Jessica on the sofa, creating physical distance that mirrored his attempt to distance himself from her actions. And Jessica, always the confident one, always the favorite, sat alone in her shame and exposure. "I am sorry," she whispered, though it was unclear to whom she was apologizing. "Sorry is not enough," my father replied. "Not this time. I had come seeking vindication, and I had found it. But as I looked at my broken family, I felt no triumph, only sadness. The truth had come at a devastating cost." The days following the confrontation were filled with painful conversations and difficult decisions. After Jessica's tearful confession, the living room had fallen into a heavy silence, broken only by my mother's quiet sobs and my father's occasional deep sighs. Eventually, Jessica had composed herself enough to provide a full explanation. The gambling had started small, a weekend trip to Atlantic City with Thomas, a few online poker games when she could not sleep. But what began as entertainment quickly escalated into addiction. She chased losses, convinced each new bet would turn their fortunes around. Thomas had tried to intervene, but by then they were deeply in debt. The credit card companies were calling every day, she explained, staring at her hands. "We were 3 months behind on the mortgage. They were threatening to repossess the cars." "And you never thought to ask for help?" my father demanded. "To come to us or Lauren before things got so desperate?" Jessica shook her head miserably. "I was ashamed. Everyone thinks we are so successful. I could not admit we were drowning. So instead, you stole from Mom and let them believe I did it," I said, still struggling to comprehend the magnitude of her betrayal. "I convinced myself it was temporary," she whispered, "that no one would notice if I paid it back quickly. Then, when you started asking questions, I panicked. It was easier to let them think it was you than admit what I had done." My father's reaction transformed from shocked disbelief to cold fury. "Get out," he told Jessica and Thomas, his voice trembling with anger. "Both of you. I cannot look at you right now." Thomas stood immediately, seemingly relieved to escape the tension. "We will figure out how to repay the money," he promised, not meeting anyone's eyes. Jessica hesitated, looking to our mother for some sign of forgiveness, but my mother turned away. "Please go, Jessica," she said softly. "I need time." After they left, the three of us sat in silence for a long moment. Then my mother reached for my hand. "Lauren, I am so sorry we did not believe you," she said, her voice breaking. "We should have trusted you." My father struggled visibly with his pride. I was wrong. He finally said the words clearly difficult for him. I jumped to conclusions without proper evidence. I let Jessica manipulate me into believing the worst about you. Why did you believe her so easily? I asked the question that had been haunting me for days. What made you so quick to think I would steal from Mom? My mother and father exchanged a look I could not interpret. Jessica has always been persuasive, my mother said carefully. And she suggested there were signs we had missed expensive new clothes, talk of a vacation. She implied you might have financial problems you were hiding. None of that was true, I said. I live within my means. I always have. We know that now, my father acknowledged. We should have known it then. The conversation continued late into the night, unpacking years of family dynamics that had contributed to this moment. My father admitted he had always found it easier to connect with Jessica, whose direct approach mirrored his own. My mother confessed that she had often defended me behind closed doors, but had deferred to my father's judgment in this situation because of her own weakened state. Over the next few days, practical matters demanded attention. My mother needed the $50,000 for upcoming treatments that insurance would only partially cover. Jessica and Thomas returned 3 days later with a check for $15,000 proceeds from selling Thomas's sports car. It is a start, Jessica said, handing the check to our father. We are listing the house next week. Once it sells, we can repay the rest. My father took the check without comment. The atmosphere was frigid. A week later, we met with Lawrence Greenfield, a family attorney my father had known for years. I had insisted on this meeting, wanting everything documented properly. We have several options, Lawrence explained, looking around the table at all of us. This could be handled as a criminal matter, a civil matter, or kept within the family with proper documentation. My mother immediately shook her head. No police. I do not want my daughter arrested regardless of what she did. My father seemed less certain. She committed fraud and theft, Patricia. There should be consequences. Losing your trust is already the worst consequence, Jessica said quietly. Thomas nodded beside her. They had moved into a small apartment after listing their house, a concrete demonstration of their commitment to making amends. I had been wrestling with this decision since the confrontation. Part of me wanted Jessica to face legal consequences for her actions. She had not just stolen money, she had deliberately framed me and damaged my relationship with our parents. But another part recognized that pressing charges would fracture our family beyond repair. I have conditions, I said finally. First, Jessica needs professional help for her gambling addiction. Second, a formal repayment plan with interest documented by Lawrence. Third, Jessica will have no access to Mom's finances ever again. Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. I started seeing a therapist already, twice a week. And we are attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings together, Thomas added. I should have taken her problem more seriously sooner. Lawrence drafted the agreement on the spot, and we all signed it. It felt strange treating family matters with such legal formality, but necessary given the breach of trust. As the weeks passed, our family began a fragile healing process. I moved temporarily into my parents' home to help care for my mother, whose treatment had intensified. Being there daily allowed me to rebuild my relationship with both parents. My father especially seemed determined to make amends for doubting me. I always thought of myself as a fair man, he confessed one evening, as we sat on the porch after my mother had gone to bed. Someone who weighed evidence and made rational decisions. But I let emotion cloud my judgment when it came to you girls. I favored Jessica because she reminded me of myself, and I was harder on you because I did not understand your quieter ways. We are very different people, I acknowledged. But that does not mean you have to choose between us. I know that now, he said. Though I may have lost the right to have either of you in my life after how I handled this. I am here, Dad, I said simply. I am not going anywhere. Jessica and I maintained a strained politeness when she visited our mother. The closeness we had once shared, however competitive it had been, was gone. In its place was something more complex, neither friendship nor enmity, but a wary acknowledgement of our permanent connection, despite the damage done. "Do you think you will ever forgive me?" she asked one afternoon as we passed in the hospital corridor during one of our mother's treatments. I considered the question carefully. "I do not know," I answered honestly. "I want to, for Mom's sake, if nothing else. But trust is easier to break than rebuild." She nodded, accepting this answer without argument, a new humility that seemed genuine. By the time 3 months had passed, Jessica and Thomas had sold their house, repaying the remaining $35,000 plus interest. They were living modestly, attending therapy regularly, and slowly rebuilding their relationship with our parents. And I had learned something valuable about myself, that I was stronger than I had realized, capable of standing up for the truth even when it would have been easier to back down. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, we gathered at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. The atmosphere was different from holidays past, more subdued, less competitive, with an undercurrent of cautious optimism. My mother's health had improved significantly. Her latest scans showed the cancer was responding well to treatment, and her energy levels had increased enough that she had resumed tending her beloved garden. She moved more slowly than before, but the spark had returned to her eyes. Jessica arrived with Thomas, bearing homemade pumpkin pies and nervous smiles. She had completed 3 months of intensive therapy for gambling addiction and was now attending weekly maintenance sessions. Thomas had found a new job at a legitimate investment firm with a more modest salary but steady income. "The apartment feels like home now," Jessica told me as we set the table together, an awkward but intentional attempt at normalcy. "It is amazing how little we actually need to be happy." I nodded, noting the absence of her designer watch and expensive jewelry. The outer trappings of success that had once seemed so important to her were gone, replaced by a simple wedding band and a more authentic presence. The repayment plan had been honored faithfully. Each month, Jessica and Thomas transferred money to our mother's account, rebuilding the retirement fund they had depleted. They were living on a strict budget, with a portion of every paycheck dedicated to making amends. My own role in the family had evolved dramatically. No longer the overlooked younger daughter, I was now respected for my financial expertise and integrity. My father consulted me before making investment decisions, and my mother had officially appointed me as her financial power of attorney, with Lawrence drawing up proper legal documentation this time. "I trust you completely," she had said when signing the papers. I always did, even when I was too weak to stand up for that truth. My relationship with my father had undergone the most surprising transformation. His military rigidity had softened somewhat, allowing for more open communication between us. "I was wrong about many things," he admitted one day, as we worked together in the garage, organizing old tools. "But especially about you, Lauren. You showed more strength and character through this ordeal than I might have in your position." Coming from him, this was extraordinary praise. After Thanksgiving dinner, as we sat around the living room with coffee and pie, my mother raised her cup in an impromptu toast. "To healing," she said simply, "and to truth." We all drank to that, the silence that followed comfortable rather than strained. Later that evening, I found myself alone with my mother in the kitchen. She was washing dishes despite my protests that she should rest, insisting that the activity made her feel normal. "Do you remember what you used to tell me when I was little?" I asked, drying a plate she handed me, "about how the truth always rises to the surface eventually?" She smiled, her hands immersed in soapy water. "Like cream. The truth rises like cream." I held on to that when everything fell apart, I told her. It gave me the courage to keep fighting. My mother turned off the water and dried her hands, then took mine in hers. "What happened was terrible, but some good has come from it. Jessica is getting the help she needed. Your father has opened his heart. And you, my dear girl, have found your voice." She was right. Throughout my life, I had often yielded to Jessica's stronger personality, accepted my father's judgment without question, and quietly helped without demanding recognition. The accusation and its aftermath had forced me to stand firm, to advocate for myself, to insist on justice. The following week, I signed the lease on a small office space downtown. After years of working for Westbrook Financial, I had decided to launch my own financial advisory firm, specializing in family finances and intergenerational wealth management. My experience had shown me how easily family dynamics could complicate financial matters, and I wanted to help others navigate those challenges. Patterson Family Financial Planning, my father read from the business card I had given him. "You are using our name." "It still means something good to me," I said, "despite everything." He nodded, understanding the significance of this choice. My first clients were a mother and daughter struggling to manage the mother's retirement funds while maintaining healthy boundaries. As I guided them through creating a transparent, sustainable plan, I drew on my own family's painful lessons about trust, communication, and accountability. The final piece of our family's healing came during a private conversation with my mother as I helped her reconcile her financial statements, now a monthly ritual that reassured both of us. "I want you to know something," she said, looking up from the papers spread across her desk. "When I added you as an authorized user on my accounts years ago, it was not just because you understand money better than I do." "No," I asked, curious. "It was because you have always had integrity. Even as a child, you were honest to a fault. I never doubted that about you, Lauren, not even during those awful days when the evidence seemed stacked against you." Her words healed something deep within me. "Then why did you not defend me?" "I was weak," she admitted, "physically from the treatment, but also emotionally. I feared losing Jessica if I took your side too strongly. I tried to stay neutral, and in doing so, I failed you both in different ways." "You did not fail me," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "We are here now, stronger than before." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The accusation that had seemed like the end of my world had instead become a painful but necessary catalyst for growth. I had learned to protect myself without closing my heart to set boundaries, without building walls to demand respect, without sacrificing love. The truth had indeed risen to the surface like cream, and while it had been bitter in the moment, it had ultimately nourished us all in ways we could never have anticipated. Have you ever been falsely accused of something and had to fight to clear your name? Or have you experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for the truth is always worth it, even when it is difficult. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength in whatever battles you may be facing in your own life.